Why do some acts of defiance echo through history, while others are swallowed by the silence of oppression? What happens when the human spirit, pushed beyond its breaking point, dares to resist? The biting wind whipped across the desolate expanse of the Ravensbrück concentration camp, carrying with it the stench of coal smoke and despair. It was early March 1944, and the gray skies mirrored the mood of the women huddled within the camp's barbed wire fences. Among them was Helena, a Polish Catholic woman with eyes that had witnessed too much suffering, but still held a spark of defiance. Before the war, she had been a teacher in Krakow, known for her unwavering principles and her ability to ignite a passion for learning in her students. Now, reduced to a prisoner in striped rags, she clung to those same principles as a lifeline. Each day was a brutal repetition of forced labor, meager rations, and the constant threat of violence. The women toiled in the camp's workshops, manufacturing uniforms and equipment for the German war machine, their bodies aching, their spirits slowly eroding. But even in this living hell, Helena found small ways to maintain her humanity, sharing a kind word, offering a helping hand, or simply meeting another woman's gaze with a flicker of understanding. These tiny acts of solidarity were a form of resistance, a refusal to be completely broken by the Nazi regime. Sunday was traditionally a day of rest, even within the confines of Ravensbrück. Though the work never truly ceased, the pace slowed slightly, and the women were granted a few precious moments to gather their strength. For Helena, a devout Catholic, Sunday held a deeper significance. It was a day for prayer and for reflection, a day to connect with something larger than the misery that surrounded her. On this particular Sunday morning, the air hung heavy with dampness. A light rain began to fall, turning the already muddy ground into a thick, clinging mire. The women shuffled towards their assigned workstations, their heads bowed against the elements. Helena was assigned to a sewing machine, tasked with stitching seams on heavy woolen coats. As she sat down, the foreman, a burly man with a cruel face and a swaggering gait, approached her. "Faster, Pola," he barked, his voice dripping with contempt. "We need these coats ready for the front. No time for slacking." Helena nodded silently and began to work, her fingers flying across the fabric. But as the morning wore on, a sense of unease settled over her. The foreman's presence seemed more oppressive than usual, his eyes constantly fixed on her. And then he issued the order that would change everything. "Helena," he said, his voice low and menacing, "you will work through the Sabbath. We have a quota to meet. Understand?" Helena's heart pounded in her chest. To work on the Sabbath was a violation of her deepest beliefs, a betrayal of her faith. She knew the consequences of disobedience could be severe, but she couldn't bring herself to comply. I cannot," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "It is the Sabbath, I cannot work." The foreman's face contorted with rage. "You dare to defy me," he roared. "You are a prisoner here. You will do as you are told." "I am a prisoner of war, but also a human," Helena replied, her voice gaining strength. "Will not betray my faith." The foreman lunged at her, his hand raised to strike. Helena flinched, but she stood her ground. Before the blow could land, a chorus of voices erupted around her. Other women, witnessing the confrontation, rose from their machines, their faces filled with anger and defiance. "Leave her alone," one woman shouted. "We will not let you hurt her," cried another. The foreman, momentarily taken aback by the unexpected show of solidarity, hesitated. But his hesitation was brief. He blew a shrill whistle, signaling the guards. Within seconds, armed soldiers swarmed the workshop, their rifles pointed at the assembled women. The air crackled with tension. The women, their faces pale but resolute, stood shoulder to shoulder, protecting Helena. They knew they were risking their lives, but they were no longer willing to stand by and watch their fellow prisoners be abused. They would not be silenced. "What is going on here?" a high-ranking officer barked, his voice echoing through the workshop. The foreman, seizing the opportunity, pointed at Helena. "This woman refused to work, and these others are defending her. They are inciting a riot." The officer's eyes narrowed. He surveyed the scene, taking in the defiant faces of the women. "Arrest them," he ordered. "All of them." Helena and the women who had stood up for her were dragged from the workshop and thrown into a holding cell. The other prisoners watched in stunned silence, fear etched on their faces. They knew what awaited the rebels, a public humiliation followed by severe punishment. As Helena sat in the cold, dark cell, she couldn't help but wonder if she had done the right thing. Had her act of defiance been foolish and reckless? Had she endangered the lives of the women who had supported her? But deep down, she knew she had no choice. She had to stand up for what she believed in, even if it meant facing the wrath of the Nazi regime. She thought of her students in Krakow and hoped they would never forget the importance of courage. The following morning, the entire camp was assembled in the central courtyard. The rain had stopped, but the air remained cold and damp. The prisoners stood in neat rows, their faces gaunt and weary. In the center of the courtyard, a makeshift platform had been erected. On it stood Helena and the other women who had participated in the rebellion. Each woman had a large sign hung around her neck. The signs read, "I am a lazy pig." The officer stepped forward, his voice booming across the courtyard. "These women have defied the orders of the Reich," he announced. "They have refused to work and have incited unrest. As punishment, they will stand here for 4 hours, exposed to the elements, wearing these signs of shame. Let this be a lesson to anyone who dares to challenge the authority of the Third Reich." Helena felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The humiliation was almost unbearable. But she refused to let the Nazis see her break. She stood tall, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her mind filled with images of freedom and hope. The hours passed slowly. The sun beat down on the women, then disappeared behind a bank of clouds. The wind picked up and the temperature dropped. The signs around their necks felt heavier with each passing minute. One by one, the women began to falter. Their legs trembled, their bodies swayed. Some collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The guards, standing nearby, watched with amusement. When a woman fell, they would approach her with a bucket of ice-cold water and douse her, jolting her awake. Helena watched in horror as her fellow prisoners suffered. She wanted to help them, to offer them comfort, but she was powerless. She could barely stand herself. Her body was numb, her mind was reeling. She closed her eyes and prayed for strength. As the 4th hour approached, Helena felt her own strength ebbing away. She swayed precariously, her vision blurring. She knew she was about to collapse, but just as she was about to lose consciousness, she heard a voice. "Helena, Helena, can you hear me?" Helena opened her eyes and saw one of her fellow prisoners, a young Jewish woman named Sarah, standing near the edge of the crowd. Sarah's eyes were filled with concern. "Give up, Helena," Sarah whispered. "We're all with you. Don't let them break you." Helena drew strength from Sarah's words. She straightened her back, took a deep breath, and held on. And then, just as she thought she could take no more, the officer announced that the punishment was over. The women were helped down from the platform and led back to their barracks. They were weak, exhausted, and humiliated, but they were not broken. They had endured the punishment and they had survived. But what they didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. Their act of rebellion had set in motion a chain of events that would plunge them into an even deeper nightmare. Back in the barracks, Helena lay on her bunk, her body aching, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. She had seen the look in the officer's eyes, the cold, calculating glint that promised further retribution. As darkness fell, a sense of unease settled over the camp. The guards seemed more vigilant than usual, their faces grim and determined. The prisoners whispered among themselves, their voices filled with fear and speculation. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a series of loud knocks on the door of the barracks. The prisoners froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. Who could be visiting them at this late hour? What did they want? The door creaked open and 2 figures stepped inside. They were not guards. They were 2 men in civilian clothes, their faces obscured by shadows. One of them carried a clipboard. Helena Kowalska. One of the men asked, his voice low and menacing. Helena's blood ran cold. How did they know her name? What did they want with her? "Yes," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I am Helena Kowalska." The man with the clipboard stepped forward. "We have been watching you, Helena," he said. "We know about your act of defiance. We know about your rebellious spirit, and we have a proposition for you." Helena stared at the men, her mind reeling. What kind of proposition could they possibly have for her? Was this some kind of trap? "We believe you have the potential to be useful to us," the man continued. "We believe you can help us maintain order in this camp." Helena's eyes widened in horror. Was this what she thought it was? Were they trying to turn her into an informant? "We want you to spy on your fellow prisoners." the man said, his voice dripping with menace. "We want you to report any acts of resistance, any signs of rebellion. If you cooperate, we will ensure your safety and comfort. You will receive extra rations, better clothing, and a lighter workload. But if you refuse, the consequences will be dire." Helena felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. They were asking her to betray her fellow prisoners, to become a tool of the Nazi regime. She would rather die. "I will never do that," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "I would rather die than betray my friends." The man's face hardened. "You have made your choice, Helena," he said. "You will regret this." The two men turned and walked out of the barracks, leaving Helena trembling in fear. She knew she had made a dangerous enemy. She knew her life was in danger, but she also knew she had done the right thing. She would not betray her principles, no matter the cost. As she lay on her bunk trying to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She could sense eyes on her, lurking in the shadows. She knew the Nazis were waiting for her to make a mistake. They were waiting for her to slip up, and she knew that her time was running out. Suddenly, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from beneath her bunk. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. What was that? Slowly, cautiously, she reached under the bunk and felt around in the darkness. Her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. She pulled it out and held it up to the dim light. It was a key, an old, rusty key, but a key nonetheless. Where did it come from? What did it unlock? Why was it hidden beneath her bunk? As Helena stared at the key, a chilling realization dawned on her. The Nazis weren't just trying to break her spirit. They weren't just trying to turn her into an informant. They were trying to frame her. They had planted the key beneath her bunk, hoping she would find it. They wanted her to believe there was a way out, a way to escape. But it was a trap, a carefully orchestrated trap designed to ensnare her and her fellow prisoners. Helena knew she had to be careful. She couldn't trust anyone. The Nazis were watching her every move. They were waiting for her to make a mistake, but she also knew she couldn't give up. She had to find a way to expose their plot, to warn her fellow prisoners before it was too late. But how? Who could she trust? And what did the key unlock? As she pondered these questions, she heard a faint whisper coming from the bunk next to hers. "Helena," the voice whispered, "I know about the key." Helena gasped and turned to see Sarah, the young Jewish woman who had encouraged her during the punishment, looking at her with a mixture of fear and determination. "What do you mean you know about the key?" Helena whispered back. "I saw them planted," Sarah said. "I saw the two men in civilian clothes sneaking around the barracks last night. I didn't know what they were doing at the time, but now I understand. It's a trap." Helena felt a surge of hope. She wasn't alone. She had an ally. "We have to do something," she said. "We have to warn the others." "I know," Sarah said. "But how? The guards are watching us closely. We can't risk being caught." Helena thought for a moment. "I have an idea," she said, "but it's risky, very risky." She explained her plan to Sarah, who listened intently, her eyes widening with each passing moment. When Helena was finished, Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "It's crazy," she said, "but it might just work. We have to try." And so, under the cover of darkness, Helena and Sarah put their plan into motion. They knew they were risking their lives. They knew the consequences of failure would be catastrophic, but they had no choice. They had to fight back. They had to resist. They had to expose the Nazis' plot before it was too late. As they crept through the darkened barracks, whispering warnings to their fellow prisoners, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They could sense eyes on them, lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the darkness. "Halt! Who goes there?" Helena and Sarah froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had been discovered. A guard emerged from the shadows, his rifle pointed directly at them. "What are you doing out of your bunks?" he demanded. Helena knew they were caught. She knew their plan had failed, but she refused to give up. She refused to be silenced. "We know about the key," she said, her voice ringing with defiance. "We know about your trap. And we're not going to let you get away with it." The guard's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" he said. "What key?" Before Helena could answer, a second guard appeared, blocking their escape. They were surrounded. "Search them," the first guard ordered. The guards roughly searched Helena and Sarah, finding nothing. But then one of the guards noticed the key clutched tightly in Helena's hand. "What's this?" he said, snatching the key from her. The guards examined the key, their faces growing grim. They knew exactly what it was. And they knew exactly what Helena and Sarah were planning. "In big trouble now," the first guard said, his voice dripping with menace. You're going to pay for this." Helena and Sarah were dragged from the barracks and taken to the camp commandant's office. They were interrogated for hours, but they refused to reveal anything. They refused to betray their fellow prisoners. Finally, the commandant had enough. He ordered them to be taken to the camp's execution ground. As Helena and Sarah were led to their deaths, they walked with their heads held high, their spirits unbroken. They knew they had fought bravely. They knew they had done everything they could to resist the Nazi regime. But what they didn't know was that their act of defiance had sparked something within the other prisoners. A flicker of hope, a spark of rebellion, a determination to fight back no matter the cost. As they stood before the firing squad, Helena looked at Sarah and smiled. "We did what we could," she said. "We fought for what was right," Sarah smiled back. "And we will never be forgotten," she said. The commandant gave the order and the firing squad raised their rifles. But just as they were about to pull the triggers, a voice rang out from the darkness. "Stop! Don't shoot!" Everyone froze. Who was it? What was happening? A figure emerged from the shadows, walking towards the execution ground. It was a woman dressed in the uniform of a high-ranking Nazi officer. As she stepped into the light, Helena and Sarah gasped in disbelief. They recognized her. It was someone they knew, someone they trusted. It was. What secrets did this officer hold? Had she come to save them or to deliver a final, crushing blow? What role did she play in the twisted game being played within the walls of Ravensbrück? And what would become of Helena and Sarah, caught in the crosshairs of a deadly conspiracy? Find out next time, as we delve deeper into the mysteries of Ravensbrück and the women who dared to resist.